The GPS data does not have an attorney. It does not issue a denial. It does not remember things differently after time has passed. It records position, movement, timestamp, and depth. And the GPS data extracted from Brian Hooker's electronic device recorded something specific on the night of April 4th, 2026. The device was out on the water, stopping in the Sea of Abaco and returning to shore. That track does not describe 9 hours of helpless drifting at the mercy of wind and current. It describes deliberate movement to a specific location, a stop, and a return. That is confirmed, not by a family member expressing doubt, not by a podcaster analyzing inconsistencies, by a United States official on record, confirmed simultaneously to CNN, to ABC News, to CBS News, to NBC News, and to Fox News Digital. And in the week that followed that confirmation, the U.S. Coast Guard Investigative Service put divers in the water in the Bahamas. They deployed remotely operated underwater vehicles. They brought a cadaver dog to shore. They searched newly identified areas of interest for 4 days. And on Thursday, June 4th, 2026, they took custody of the 8-foot dinghy that Brian Hooker says he and Lynette were aboard when she disappeared. The same dinghy he says she fell from while holding the engine key, and brought it back to the United States for additional forensic examination. On Friday, June 8, 2026, the Coast Guard wrapped up its renewed search in the Bahamas. The agency said the case remains under investigation. No results from the search have been publicly disclosed. Lynette Hooker is still missing. This is the verdict room. We examine the evidence. We follow the facts. And at the end of every investigation, we deliver the verdict. If you are new here, subscribe right now and hit that notification bell. Every week we bring you the forensic depth, the investigative analysis, and the documented record that tells you what is actually known in the cases that matter most. If you are already part of this community, hit that like button right now. It helps more people find this investigation. Now let us build the complete current documented picture. What the GPS data shows, what the 4-day dive search deployed, what the dinghy seizure means, and where the investigation stands today, with Soulmate in a Fort Lauderdale dry dock and the dinghy now in federal custody. Lynette Hooker was 55 years old. Some reports have confirmed 56. She was from Onstead, Michigan. She and her husband, Brian Hooker, had been married for approximately 25 years. They bought a boat in Rockport, Texas in 2023, a 1980 Morgan 461 sailboat that Lynette described in her own words in a YouTube video as a little rough on the edges. But we knew we were up for the task. They spent a year repairing it, documented the process, built a social media following under the name Sailing Hookers, and then set out to live the retirement dream they had talked about for years. She was enthusiastic on camera, warm, funny, a person who genuinely loved the life she was building. On the evening of April 4th, 2026, she was last seen at the Abaco Inn in Hopetown in the Bahamas. She and Brian departed the inn at approximately 7:30 p.m., 4 minutes after that evening's sunset, according to Bahamian officials, aboard their 8-foot dinghy, headed toward their 43-foot sailboat Soulmate, anchored in the area. Brian Hooker told Bahamian authorities that during the crossing, Lynette fell overboard. He said she had the engine's safety key on her when she went in the water, causing the engine to shut off. He said the wind and current carried them apart despite his desperate attempts to reach her. He said he paddled for hours, arriving at a marina at Marsh Harbor at approximately 4 a.m. on April 5th, roughly 8 to 9 hours after they had departed. Brian Hooker was detained by Bahamian authorities on April 8th for 5 days of questioning. He was released on April 13th. Prosecutors recommended against filing charges at that time, citing the ongoing investigation. He returned to the United States to be with his terminally ill mother. He has consistently and repeatedly denied any wrongdoing. His attorney, Terrell Butler, has stated he categorically and unequivocally denies any involvement in whatever happened to Lynette. That is the legal reality, and it travels through every part of this investigation. Now let us talk about the GPS evidence, because it is the reason this dive search happened, and it is the reason federal investigators are now treating this as a possible foreign murder of a U.S. national. A U.S. official confirmed to CBS News, which was the first outlet to report the development, that GPS data derived from one of Brian Hooker's electronic devices showed a track of movements that does not align with what he told investigators. The official described the data specifically. The device was out on the water, stopping in the Sea of Abaco, and then returning to shore. CBS News reported this data gave investigators a more precise location to search. A U.S. official confirmed to ABC News that what Brian Hooker told investigators does not match the GPS data recovered from his devices. A U.S. official confirmed to NBC News that Brian's information had caused investigators to search for Lynette in the wrong area. Not a slightly different area, but the wrong area, for the 2 months since she disappeared. Fox News Digital confirmed through its own U.S. official that the renewed dive search was based on GPS data from Brian Hooker's phone, on which he was actively using a marine navigation app, and that the dinghy allegedly visited the same area the GPS data identified. An area in the Sea of Abaco, where the water reaches approximately 25 feet in depth. 4 independent news organizations, 4 independent U.S. officials. One consistent documented finding: the GPS data does not match the account Brian Hooker gave investigators about where he was and what he did on the night of April 4th. The question of how GPS data from a navigation app becomes permanently irrecoverable and why the specific architecture of that data preservation matters for this investigation deserves a more detailed explanation than public coverage has generally provided. Modern marine navigation apps do not simply display a map. They build route logs. Every position the device occupies while the app is active is recorded with a timestamp and synced to remote servers. This happens automatically, continuously, and independently of any action the user takes. The user does not choose to upload their route. The route uploads itself, in real time, to servers operated by the app company, stored under the account associated with the device. Those servers are not accessible to the device user. They cannot be reached from the phone. They cannot be deleted from any app interface Brian Hooker would have had access to. They can only be accessed by the company operating them or by law enforcement holding a valid federal subpoena. The FBI laboratory at Quantico has the technical and legal infrastructure to obtain exactly that kind of subpoena and process exactly that kind of data. Blaine Stevenson, the sailing community friend who recorded and published the April 7th phone call with Brian and who conducted his own GPS-tracked drift demonstration in the same waters for independent analysis, described the mechanics specifically. He held up his own Garmin sailing watch during an interview and walked through what it records. GPS routes built in real time, navigation to specific coordinates in complete darkness, precise position tracking, depth data at each point, and automatic sync to remote application servers. He said that when he ran his own drift demonstration for this investigation, the data he submitted came from his watch, not from any other device. His watch. If Brian Hooker was wearing a marine navigation watch on the night of April 4th, and social media photographs visible in the public record show Brian wearing what appears to be a Garmin-style sailing watch in earlier photographs, distinct from the large white watch he was wearing when he was released from Bahamian custody on April 13th. That watch recorded the same kind of data: the route from shore, the directional changes on the water, every location where the device paused, the depth of the water at each of those pauses, and the route back. All of it stored on a server he could not reach from any device he had access to. The mechanism by which GPS data from a phone's navigation app becomes a permanent, irrecoverable forensic record is worth understanding clearly, because it explains why this evidence exists regardless of what Brian may have done with any physical device afterward. When a marine navigation app is active on a phone, it records position continuously. That data syncs to application servers in real time. By the time any person realizes they want that data to not exist, it already exists somewhere else, on a server operated by the app company, accessible to federal investigators through a Department of Justice subpoena, independent of the physical device, independent of whether the device has been wiped, replaced, or discarded. The data from Brian's navigation app was already stored before he stepped off that dinghy and walked ashore on April 5th. The track had already been recorded. The stops had already been time-stamped. And when federal analysts at the FBI laboratory in Quantico processed that data weeks later, what they found pointed investigators to areas of the Sea of Abaco that Brian had never mentioned to the people looking for his wife. CBS News specifically confirmed that the investigation is examining whether Lynette Hooker's death may not have been an accident. A U.S. Official told CBS News that finding her remains could provide crucial evidence to help determine whether she could have been killed. The investigation has been formally framed as a possible foreign murder of a U.S. national, a federal statute that gives the CGIS and the Department of Justice jurisdiction to investigate and potentially prosecute crimes committed against American citizens in foreign waters. The items reportedly missing from Soulmate when CGIS investigators conducted their forensic examination deserve specific mention because they connect directly to the dive search's focus area and to what investigators were looking for in 25 feet of water. When federal agents examined Soulmate, they cataloged what was present aboard and noted what appeared to be absent based on what the vessel's own social media documentation showed should have been there. 3 items in particular were flagged. Lynette's pink diving weight belt, visible in social media documentation from the vessel, was not found aboard. A torpedo-style outboard engine kept as a spare after being replaced by the newer NT300 electric motor was also unaccounted for. And investigators raised questions about whether all spare anchors documented aboard Soulmate prior to April 4th were still present. Weight belts, old outboard engines, and anchor chain are not lightweight items. They are dense, heavy, designed specifically to counteract buoyancy. Items of that type placed at depth in open water stay exactly where they are put. They are invisible from the air. They are invisible from the surface unless you are directly above them in clear conditions. They would not be detectable by the aerial grid searches the Coast Guard had been running since April 5th. But they would be detectable by divers with the specific GPS coordinates of where the device on the water stopped. The dive search, which deployed divers, ROVs, and a cadaver dog, was specifically focused on areas in the Sea of Abaco, where the water reaches approximately 25 feet. Deeper than the areas covered by the previous aerial searches that had been directed to the locations Brian described. At 25 feet of depth, with the right ballast, something placed carefully on the sea floor stays there indefinitely. Whatever the CGIS divers found or did not find during those 4 days in the water near Hopetown is now part of the evidentiary record at Quantico. The Coast Guard declined to comment on results. The investigation continues. Now let us talk about what the 4-day dive search actually deployed, because the scale of resources sent to the Bahamas tells you something specific about what investigators believed they might find. The U.S. Coast Guard cutter Margaret Norvell, based in Miami, arrived in the Bahamas on June 2nd. The search deployed divers, remotely operated underwater vehicles, drones, and a cadaver dog. Divers entered the water in the Sea of Abaco on June 3rd. The cadaver dog was seen with investigators on shore, covering the landward approaches. The Coast Guard released video footage of its teams at work in the Abaco waters. Footage showing a small orange Coast Guard dinghy navigating near Hopetown, accompanied by a Royal Bahamas Defense Force vessel, and investigators from CGIS carefully wading in shallow coastal waters near a quay. This was not a routine search. ROVs, remotely operated underwater vehicles, are brought to marine searches when investigators need to cover terrain at depths or in conditions where human divers cannot effectively search visually. Cadaver dogs detect biological decomposition signatures and are deployed when investigators believe they may be searching for human remains rather than a living person. The combination of resources confirmed that this search was recovery-focused, not rescue-focused. The dinghy seizure on June 4th is analytically significant in ways that the coverage has not fully examined, because the physical vessel is a different category of evidence than the GPS data or the Soulmate. The GPS data tells investigators where the device went. The Soulmate tells investigators what was and was not on board the larger vessel. The dinghy is where Brian Hooker says Lynette fell overboard. It is the last physical location where Lynette is documented as having been alive, and it has been sitting in the Bahamas, exposed to the marine environment for 2 months. But 2 months of saltwater exposure, while it degrades some types of biological evidence, does not eliminate all of it. Modern forensic techniques can extract DNA profiles from surfaces that have been exposed to seawater for extended periods. Luminol testing for biological material can detect traces that are invisible to the naked eye and that survive water exposure. Impact analysis of the dinghy's surfaces, whether there are marks, impressions, or tool traces consistent with specific types of force being applied to specific areas of the hull, does not require biological material at all. and CGIS investigator was seen aboard the dinghy during the seizure, surveying it carefully and holding up a life jacket. The condition and position of that life jacket is itself forensically relevant. A life jacket that was deployed, worn, or handled in specific ways leaves different physical evidence than one that was never removed from storage. A life jacket that was thrown into the water, as Brian told Carly Aylesworth he did in a voicemail after the incident, would show different evidence than one that sat undisturbed. The dinghy's engine and its key system are also now available for examination. Brian's account specifically involves the engine key. He says Lynette had it when she went overboard, causing the engine to cut off. The physical state of the key system, the ignition, and the engine controls on that dinghy will either be consistent with or inconsistent with that specific description of events. All of that is now in federal custody in the United States, being examined by the FBI laboratory at Quantico. The most significant development from the active search period came on June 4th. CBS News captured the moment Coast Guard investigators took custody of the 8-foot dinghy from Bahamian authorities. An investigator was seen aboard the dinghy, surveying it and holding up a life jacket. The dinghy was transported back to the Coast Guard cutter aboard a tender boat. That dinghy is now in the United States undergoing additional forensic examination. This matters enormously. The physical vessel aboard which Brian Hooker says Lynette fell overboard, the same dinghy he says lost engine power when she went in with the key, was sitting in the Bahamas for 2 months. It is now in federal custody. Every surface of it, every biological trace, every fiber, every tool mark or impact mark, every detail of the engine and its key system will be examined. The life jacket that the CGIS investigator was seen holding up in the seized dinghy, its condition, its position, whether it had ever been deployed or worn, is now part of the forensic record. The Coast Guard concluded its active Bahamas search operations on Friday, June 8th. A spokesperson for the agency declined to comment on results and confirmed the case remains under investigation. Authorities said information will be released as it becomes available. Lynette Hooker was not found during the 4-day search. That outcome, the search concluding without publicly disclosed results, should be understood in context rather than as a simple negative finding. Federal investigators do not publicly disclose forensic results from active criminal investigations while those investigations are ongoing. The fact that the Coast Guard did not announce they found nothing does not mean they found nothing. What it means is that whatever evidence was recovered, whether from the seafloor, from the dinghy, from shore, is now in federal custody and part of the evidentiary record being processed at the FBI laboratory in Quantico. CBS News confirmed that the rest of the evidence from this case is still being processed by the FBI at Quantico. That includes material from Soulmate, from Brian's electronic devices, and now from the dinghy. The Soulmate itself has been moved from the Coast Guard station at Fort Pierce, approximately 100 miles south, to Fort Lauderdale. A U.S. official confirmed to Fox News Digital that authorities needed the capability to lift the vessel fully out of the water for continued forensic examination, a capability Fort Pierce did not have. When a vessel is hauled into dry dock, every surface below the waterline becomes accessible. The hull, the keel, the underbody, every inch that saltwater has been covering since April 4, 2026. Investigators are also working to extract data from the FLIR infrared thermal imaging system aboard Soulmate, a system valued at approximately $33,000, specifically designed to detect heat signatures in complete darkness and identify a person in open water at night from the deck of a vessel. Brian told investigators the darkness made it impossible to locate Lynette after she went in. The data from that thermal imaging camera is being processed as part of the forensic probe. There are 2 people whose names need to be said in this investigation and held alongside every piece of evidence discussed. Carly Aylesworth is 29 years old. She is Lynette's daughter. On Mother's Day 2026, she posted a video and said, "It's pretty hard right now to know that she's not a text away anymore." She told ABC News that she hopes her mother is just in Cuba or something, just needing a break from life. But she said she doesn't, at this point, have much faith that Lynette is still alive. She was grateful the Coast Guard was in the Bahamas conducting the new search. She told ABC News, "She has to be somewhere, so all the help that we could get, it's greatly appreciated." On May 27th, the day the dive search was publicly confirmed, federal investigators came to the home of Darlene Hamlet, Lynette's mother, and collected DNA samples from Darlene, from Carly, and from Lynette's father, 3 family members. On the same day, divers were cleared to enter the water. Investigators, CBS News confirmed, wanted to be able to run identification immediately while their team was still on the ground in the Bahamas if the divers found something. They did not want to retrieve material, return home, collect samples separately, and travel back. They wanted to know on the spot. You do not collect DNA from 3 family members on the day you announce a dive search unless you believe the divers are going to find something to test it against. Darlene Hamlet gave her DNA. Carly Aylesworth gave her DNA. Lynette's father gave his DNA, so that when Lynette is found, the identification can happen while the team is still there. All information in this video is based on confirmed reporting by CNN, CBS News, ABC News, NBC News, Fox News Digital, News Nation, and the Detroit News, as well as confirmed public statements from multiple U.S. officials speaking on record, the U.S. Coast Guard, and Carly Aylesworth. Brian Hooker has not been charged with any crime and denies any wrongdoing. All individuals are presumed innocent unless charged and convicted in a court of law. This video is for informational and analytical purposes only. If you have any information about the disappearance of Lynette Hooker, or about the unidentified sailboat that was moored alongside Soulmate in Aunt Pat's Bay on the night of April 4, 2026, submit it through the CGIS Tips application, completely anonymous, available on iOS and Android. If this investigation matters to you, if the kind of documented, humanized reporting that keeps Lynette Hooker's name in front of the people who need to hear it is what you want to see more of, subscribe to the Verdict Room right now and hit that notification bell. Every week we examine the evidence, follow the facts, and deliver the verdict. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. The CGIS search has concluded. The dinghy is in federal custody. The Soulmate is in dry dock in Fort Lauderdale. What do you think the forensic examination of that dinghy will produce? This is the Verdict Room. The Coast Guard arrived on June 2nd. Divers entered the water on June 3rd. The dinghy was seized on June 4th. The search concluded on June 8th. Lynette Hooker was not found during those 4 days. The case remains under investigation. The GPS data recorded where Brian Hooker's device went on the night of April 4th. The dinghy aboard which he says Lynette fell overboard is now in federal custody. The Soulmate is in a Fort Lauderdale dry dock awaiting a full hull examination. The evidence from both vessels and from Brian's electronic devices is being processed at the FBI laboratory in Quantico. Lynette Hooker has been missing for 68 days. She chose a life on the ocean because she genuinely loved it. She built that life with her own hands and documented every day of it for a world that came to care about her. Her mother wants to bring her home. Her daughter wants to grieve her properly. The investigation is active. The forensic work continues. And somewhere in the data being processed at Quantico, in the GPS track that tells a different story than the one Brian Hooker told, in the evidence recovered from a dinghy that is now in federal custody, the answer to what happened on the night of April 4th is getting closer to the surface. The evidence has spoken. There is a specific element of the investigation timeline that has received less attention than it deserves: the relationship between the GPS findings and the nearly 2 months of searching that preceded them. From April 5th through early June 2026, the search for Lynette Hooker was directed largely based on information Brian provided to authorities. The maps he drew using AI tools showing his purported drift route, the location where he said Lynette went overboard, the general area he described when asked where investigators should focus. Coast Guard aerial grid searches, Royal Bahamas police force efforts, and volunteer search teams all worked from a picture shaped substantially by what Brian told them. A U.S. official confirmed to NBC News that this information sent investigators to the wrong location entirely. Not to a slightly different area, the wrong area. Nearly 2 months of search resources directed based on an account that the GPS data from Brian's own device contradicts. The practical implication is that Lynette Hooker may have been in recoverable range for a significant part of those 2 months, potentially in 25 feet of water at specific coordinates that were recorded on Brian's device from the first night, while the search was focused elsewhere. That possibility is one that the forensic examination of the dinghy and the continued processing of Soulmate's data at Quantico may eventually shed more light on. Blaine Stevenson addressed the GPS data publicly in his most recent statements. He described what circles on a GPS track mean in maritime navigation. You do not circle in a specific spot when you are drifting. Wind does not move you in circles. Current does not move you in circles. Circles on a navigation track mean you are looking for something, or you found it, and you stopped. Blaine has been following the facts of this case since the very beginning, through the phone call he recorded on April 7th and every development since. Whatever his private assessment of the situation may be, his public statements have consistently centered on one thing: finding Lynette. Her mother and her daughter deserve to know where she is. They deserve to be able to bring her home. The investigation is now oriented around making that possible. The dinghy is in federal custody. The GPS coordinates are being analyzed. The Soulmate is in dry dock, and the forensic work continues at Quantico. The evidence has spoken. One final thought on what the Coast Guard's 4-day search in the Bahamas represents in the broader arc of this investigation. Because the public discussion of the search conclusion has largely focused on what was not found, rather than on what was accomplished. The CGIS deployed divers, ROVs, drones, and a cadaver dog to the Sea of Abaco. They searched newly identified areas of interest derived from GPS data recovered from Brian Hooker's device. They took custody of the dinghy aboard which Lynette is last documented to have been seen alive and transported it to the United States for forensic examination. All of this happened with the full cooperation and permission of the Royal Bahamas Police Force. The fact that the search concluded without a public announcement of finding Lynette's remains does not mean the search found nothing. Federal investigators do not disclose forensic findings from active criminal probes while those investigations are ongoing. The Coast Guard spokesperson's statement that the case remains under investigation and information will be released as it becomes available is the standard language of an agency that has something to process before it can speak. What the 4 days in the Bahamas definitively produced is this: a federally seized dinghy now in the custody of U.S. investigators, the physical vessel at the center of the night Lynette disappeared, available for the full forensic examination that has not yet been possible. Everything the CGIS found at the GPS coordinates Brian's device recorded, whether physical evidence, biological material, or confirming absence, is now part of the federal evidentiary record. The investigation is active. The next chapter is at Quantico in Fort Lauderdale, and in the forensic examination of a small 8-foot boat that is now in the hands of people who know exactly what to look for. Lynette Hooker was 55 years old. She chose the ocean because she loved it. She documented every day of that life with warmth and honesty. Her daughter wants to grieve her properly. Her mother wants to bring her home. The evidence has spoken. The AIS gap remains one of the most documented and least explained elements of the night of April 4th, and in light of the GPS findings and the dive search, its significance has only increased. Soulmate's automatic identification system, a standard tracking system that broadcasts vessel identity, speed, and GPS position continuously to nearby vessels and maritime tracking services, went dark at 9:29 p.m. on April 4th. Vessel Finder, a marine tracking service that logs AIS data in real time, obtained and published this data. Fox News Digital confirmed it independently. The AIS did not come back online until 8:40 a.m. the following morning. 11 hours and 11 minutes of silence on a vessel equipped with a fully functioning electrical system that, based on the battery management logs investigators now have, was recording electrical events throughout that same period. Brian Hooker told investigators he and Lynette left Soulmate together at approximately 7:30 p.m. and did not return until search and rescue accompanied him back the following morning. If that is true, there was no one aboard Soulmate to disable the AIS at 9:29 p.m. If it is not true, if the GPS data showing deliberate movement to a specific location, a stop, and a return is describing something other than a helpless 9-hour drift, then the AIS gap at 9:29 p.m. and the GPS track telling a different story are part of the same documented sequence of events on that night. A former federal prosecutor speaking on record to Fox News Digital called the 11-hour AIS gap highly suspicious and stated directly that AIS systems on powered operational vessels do not fail spontaneously for 11 consecutive hours and then restore themselves at sunrise. Brian Hooker was a telecommunications technician before the sailing life. He sourced, installed, and maintained every electronic system aboard Soulmate. He knew what the AIS was broadcasting and what it would mean to turn it off. He knew what a navigation app records and where that data goes. He knew what the FLIR thermal imaging system could detect in dark water. He knew what every system on that boat was capable of. The GPS data from his own device recorded where he went anyway. The dinghy aboard which Lynette disappeared is now in federal custody. The evidence has spoken.